Hi, everyone. This is John Daly. I'm here with my co host Thomas E. House for another episode of the Reagan Caucus podcast. I'm very excited about our guest today. He has been writing and producing movies and television for the last 30 years. His career sort of began with a great Clint Eastwood film, Space Cowboys, which he wrote. He also wrote the screenplay for last year's Reagan movie, starring Dennis Quaid, which of course makes him a perfect fit for this podcast. He is one more point I want to add about him. He is the founder and president of I-40 Studios, which we'll talk about a little bit later. I'm talking about the one and only Howard Klausner. Howie, thanks for joining the two of us today on the Reagan Caucus podcast.
You guys, thanks for having me. Really happy to hang out with you this morning.
Well, we appreciate that, and like I said, we're very excited about this. I wanted to start things off by talking about the film Reagan. I brought this up with you on a different podcast that I host, but when I first learned of the film prior to its release, my initial thought was, finally, there is going to be this feature film done in earnest on, I would call the most beloved and popular American president of my lifetime. I know this was a project that you, Howie, dedicated many years of your life to. Can you talk about when you first decided that you were going to write this screenplay? And did you worry a lot about, facing too strong of headwinds in a movie industry that tends to lean left?
Man, this may be a 4-hour podcast, boys. That's
fine. We got time. We got time.
That's a lot of question, and sure, let me just dive right in. I guess just a quick thing on my background. I grew up. I'm talking to you from Franklin, Tennessee, which is where I live. I moved to Hollywood to do what I do, basically, to get in the business. And that was in the 80s, and I think that was right in the middle of Reagan's presidency when I went to college. And obviously, we've seen so much change in 40 years in the political discourse, both the bright sunshine of when he was in office, and then just kind of the darkening we've been through. So I say this with all diplomacy and love towards those that I once worked with on the West Coast, but I was kind of soft canceled because the culture being what it is, I mean, it was never anything nasty. Nobody dragged me through the mud, but I stopped getting jobs. I stopped, and I don't wear this on my sleeve because I was really able to bounce back. I'm friends with these folks, and they've told me over the years, gee, I really wanted to hire you on this thing, but I think you're probably a little conservative, and you got that Christian thing going. So it's like, and I was really happy to hear that, because for a while I thought that, what, I'm just bad and they're just not hiring me anymore. So, that was a relief, but anyway, with that kind of a backdrop, I returned to Tennessee, where I grew up, after about 25 years on the West Coast, and I've been here for a while. And so the Reagan movie came to me through Mark Joseph and John Sullivan, who produced the film, and they knew that I was friendly to Reagan and conservatism and things like that, without being a bomb thrower. I'm an artist. I don't write politically. I like stories, and so 14 years later, we were sitting in the theater last August and watched it. It was you talk about headwinds, because for the longest time we were trying to develop the film and make the movie using Hollywood resources and Hollywood money. And of course, it's just not going to happen. After about 7 years or so of that, we just finally said, you know what, we're going to have to do this thing independently. And so that's exactly what we did. But using top talent, using Dennis Quaid, using Sean McNamara directing the film. So, it was a long labor of love, emphasis on labor. But we're really pleased with how it came out. What I would say is, and I just talked to the producer. I was on a panel the other night with the producer, Mark Joseph. We have filed with the Guinness Book of World Records for the biggest split for Rotten Tomatoes between the audience response and the critics' response. 18% of the critics liked our movie. That means 82% hated it. 98 of the audience gave it a big thumbs up. So it's like, we think we own the biggest disparity ever.
Well, isn't that fitting for Reagan, though? I mean, the media hated on him, and then the people just loved him. He won 49 states.
It's so Reagan-like. Of course, the movie would work out that way.
Oh no, it's true. It's I think there is that disparity you mentioned. So we see it a lot, in that industry, where there is this huge proven market for these types of stories to appeal to And it's not just people say, well, this Reagan just appeals to red state America. No, again, he was, as Thomas said, 49 states. He won his reelection. The guy
Yes.
was loved across the aisle. It was sort of interesting. I remember in the Reagan movie, that scene where they show the video from Genesis, Land of Confusion, which I remember well from my
Yeah.
childhood. And I
Right.
remember at the time, you could tell it was obvious, and I didn't understand politics that well back then. You understood they were taking shots at Reagan, and it was so strange to me because in my world, I grew up in Colorado. Lower middle income. Reagan was this idol to us, this hero. We're like, what are these guys doing? But I mean, I love the song. I love the song, but it's just, yeah, like that. That kind of goes to that point where back in the day, he was even, facing this from the, we'll call it the elites, that probably gets overused a little bit these days, but,
Mhm.
this one view through them and one view through everyday Americans. And it was quite a bit different.
Well, I think one of the things we always have to remember is, his famous line, I didn't leave the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party left me.
Right.
Reagan was the first 40 years of his life, an FDR Democrat,
Yep.
which back then was considered pretty liberal. And finally, about 1960 or so is when he went conservative. But I say that because it wasn't this huge repudiation of everything he grew up with. He was a middle of the country guy. So of course he was people connected with him. The members of each individual party, they either glommed onto him or they hated his guts. Sound familiar? So I mean, the more things change, the more they stay exactly the same. He was in the middle, real Americans. I say real Americans, just people who just want to, just live, get along with everybody, be safe, have their neighbors. They loved the guy. I'll never forget this. I think and it really, when I had I grew up a Kennedy Democrat. My parents, one of my first memories of life is my mother crying in the next room at the funeral of John F. Kennedy. I was 3 years old. It's one of my first memories. I didn't know why she was crying. I didn't know any of that. But we sort of grew up like that, very centrist Democrats. By the way, those centrist Democrats of the 1960s are more conservative than Republicans are now. So that's how much life changes. But the thing is, for me, I confess this. I shouldn't say this on the Reagan centered podcast, but okay, everybody, I'm just going to say it. I worked in Jimmy Carter's 1976 and 1980 campaigns as a volunteer. Great man, terrible president. So anyway, but when I had my flip, my moment, and I think, John, you certainly remember this. Thomas, you're probably too young, but when he was shot in 1981. And if you remember that time, it was like this just really, really tense time for a few days. It's like, my God, have we gone back to 1963? Is this going to happen again? And he survived it. But when he came back to that joint session of Congress 6 weeks later to give that speech, just basically the "I'm back" speech, both sides of the aisle on their feet, cheering, crying, laughing, hugging on this guy as he's walking there for like 20 minutes. He couldn't even talk. They were just so happy. It was like dad had come back. And I'll tell you, that was the night for me. I was like, I don't know what this guy's got, but I want some of that. And I've been a Reagan lover ever since.
Yeah, it's interesting. So you're right. Thomas is quite a bit younger than us, but he is an old Reagan soul. The guy knows more
Attaboy.
about Ronald Reagan than I
I knew
do
I
for
liked
sure.
him. I knew I liked him.
Excellent. Well, I wanted to ask you a little bit about Paul Kengor. He wrote 8 books, I believe, on Ronald Reagan, and I know he provided a lot of guidance for you when writing the film Reagan.
He
I'm
did.
curious, what kind of working relationship did you have with him? I assume he probably helped sort of fill in a lot of blanks for you on Reagan's history.
I may have this book memorized. I'm not sure, but Principles of
Oh,
a Reagan. So we knew that the basis of the movie we wanted to tell was the Crusader and God and Ronald Reagan, those two together. But that's the story of Reagan's. Not just, it's not an evangelical book, but how faith and love of people is what drove all of his. I don't even like to use the word politics. He was just very much a pragmatic, problem solving kind of guy who loved America. Kingor I became friends with him as I began the script, and we have been friends ever since. And he never controlled anything. He never could, I didn't give him pages or anything. It was like I was terrified when we were going into production, and he was the last guy to look at the script. I was like, man, what if I choked? But he called back and he said, listen, I completely sign off on this. It's he really liked the way things were presented, but he wasn't so much just the fact checker guy. I mean, the thing I want to say about Paul is, I mean, nobody is a Reagan scholar like Paul Kingor. I mean, and without being obsessed with him, he just seems to have really gotten him, and that's why he's written so many books about it. And this one I just held up, The Principles of a Reagan Conservative. For me, I understood him the best reading that. I think, but he was really instrumental as not only as an advisor, but really as a support system. He was so great with us. This movie took forever to get made. I mean, I've been on a lot of movies, and the average is about 3 to 5 years from script to screen. 14. So I loved Paul was, not only all that as a historian and a writer, but really, really a big champion of all of us.
Excellent. I'll ask you one more question before I toss you over to Thomas here. You mentioned in an email to me that you probably watched at least 1,000 hours of Reagan on YouTube. I sort of connected with that. I haven't watched quite that many, but I admit I have found myself glued to YouTube from time to time, usually at night when my family's asleep, watching old Reagan speeches.
Right.
He was such a great communicator. He knew how to connect with people, and he understood how to persuade people, which I think has become sort of a lost art in today's politics. Can you talk a little bit just about Reagan's gift for persuasion and how important you think it was to his presidency?
I think first and foremost, I think it was everything to his presidency. I think if you look at the life of Ronald Reagan and the way I truly constructed the script to look at his life is everything. And by the way, I don't know that I actually dropped this in the dialogue but it is true. He even said it. He goes, I didn't really know the purpose of my life. He was looking for the purpose of his life all the way up to 71 years old, even being president of the United States. He gets elected president of the United States. It wasn't until that he was shot and he woke up, and it was just as clear as a bell. He didn't know who Gorbachev was at the time, but Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall, talk about great communication. That was the purpose of his life. So you look at that track, the guy grows up. His first job is he's a lifeguard. And in the film we even say, and it's true, this is how he said it. He goes, I could see people were in trouble before they could see they were in trouble. So he starts out as a lifeguard. He's an actor. He was a performer right away. He was doing dramatic readings in church with his mother as a 9-year-old boy. They needed the money, quite honestly, but he fully believed what he was saying. But he became a performer then. He became an actor. He was a broadcaster. So he's a sports broadcaster, and that's where he was discovered. He was actually on Catalina Island in California. Somebody had a look. He was covering the Cubs for the radio, and somebody had a look at him and said, I think you might look pretty good on screen. Now he becomes an actor. And so he was a bigger movie star than people remember. People kind of, if you remember back in the 80s, they dismissed it as, he was some B-level actor. Not true. He actually had he wasn't nominated for King's Road, but he came close. After that, he becomes the president of the Screen Actors Guild. Now he goes on all these speeches for General Electric after the acting career ends. His entire life was really preparing him as the great communicator. And that's what he saw as his primary job as president of the United States, to communicate all the things that you and I just take for granted, just as far as just faith, family, freedom, etc. And so by the time he became president, that he had reached his full flower. And I do think his communication to bring down the Berlin Wall was not only the greatest achievement for an American president, one of the greatest achievements of all time. He didn't end communism. Communism's still going, but he sure stopped it there.
Yeah, no, amazing man for sure. I want to go ahead and bring Thomas into the conversation. Go ahead, Thomas.
Yeah, I like what you say about his ability to communicate and how you emphasize that in the movie or in the script. I get stupid for the script into the movie. That I think we underrate, I guess, the rhetorical power of the presidency. Right? He never had a Republican House the entire time he was the president. There was very limited to what kind of laws, legislation he could get passed, but he was just so effective because of his ability, his leadership, and his ability to communicate. And I was just I was really impressed that you sort of identified that his mission there was this sort of rhetorical mission in the presidency that apparently was very, very effective because it scared the heck out of the Soviets, and it helped eventually speed up the fall of their empire.
And speaking of communication, Thomas, he was also a great poker player because the thing that really probably the chip that made it all fall apart for the Soviet Union was SDI, Star Wars.
Yeah.
It didn't exist. It was all on paper. And it's funny, it does now.
Yeah.
I mean, he believed in it enough, and people mocked him later, like, he just watched too many movies. So look at the Iron Dome in Israel. Look at our own missile defense, which we're quickly getting back on track with. But that whole thing, really, I mean, he knew early on, we can't face these guys down militarily, or we're going to destroy the world. I'm going to play poker and make them believe that we're coming on. And essentially, he bankrupted the Soviet Union. He bankrupted them. He took all their chips. And Gorbachev was the first guy to say, that's how he beat us. That's how he beat us. We couldn't keep up.
Yeah, kind of reminds
communication. That's communication right there.
Yeah. Yeah, it kind of reminds me the secondary effect of it, that it got all these people interested in missile defense, and then eventually that becomes a thing.
Right.
That kind of reminded me of like the old Star Trek show with Captain Kirk telling Scotty to make it happen, and Scotty would say it's impossible. We can't make it happen, and he's no, make it happen anyway. That's kind of what Reagan did with all the engineers involved in that.
What does he say? Make it so.
Make it so.
Yes, sir, Mr. President. I don't know how, but okay.
Yeah, and like you said, now in Israel they have the Iron Dome. Saves a lot of lives.
Absolutely.
So I'm glad that you said that. I didn't realize that, but that he wasn't really just a B movie actor. Like, and that makes a lot more sense in my own family history because back in 1943, my grandpa was in Hawaii about to be sent to the South Pacific, and he got a telegram from my grandmother that the baby was born, and he responded, name him after me. Right, but she didn't get that telegram in time because she named the baby Ronald after her favorite actor, Ronald Reagan. So,
love that.
So it's like, okay, so that he was a little bit more famous than that helps me understand a little better. He was a little bit more famous than the whole B movie actor.
Oh yeah, he was kind of like as an actor. He was a pretty face that the studio grabbed right away. If you look at those young pictures of him, that's a pretty studly Tom Cruise kind of looking guy. I mean, he was a very, very handsome young man. But he had actually had a lifetime of acting. He wasn't just a model, so let's put him on screen. He'd been, as I told you a moment ago, he'd been acting since he was 8, 9 years old. He actually studied theater at Eureka College. So he knew what he was doing. And before long, it came from, he stopped being kind of an extra with a couple of lines to, he's the key player. Probably his greatest role was a movie called King's Road. And he wasn't nominated, but a lot of people thought he got ripped off by not getting nominated. He's very compelling in that movie. And he did several others that were like, they weren't just Bedtime for Bonzo. That's the one that everybody remembers, because that was the end of his career. He knew it. He was just, that was a paycheck, but because he was, again, his whole life was spent looking for that purpose.
Yeah, I remember in the theaters when we went, I took my wife to go see this, and we loved the movie because my wife and I are both Reagan fans. And the people in the audience, I can't remember if they clapped, but they were very active during the showing. They just really, everyone loved it. And I was kind of in tears by the end of the movie. And one of the things that got me of all the things got me, first of all, they set up the whole tear down this wall thing perfectly. That was awesome. That whole scene was amazing. But and that's true, right? You had the younger, what do you call it, speechwriters or wanted him to say this, and then
Oh
George
yeah.
Schultz said, no, you shouldn't say
George
that.
Schultz was doing everything in his power to stop him from doing it. Which
Yeah.
I think everybody loves to criticize poor old Schultz about it, but Schultz he was a diplomat. He's like, oh man, don't make them angry. I've worked so hard for this, but you know what? Reagan knew. He was like, no, this is gonna work. You gotta trust me, George.
But that's awesome. And then one of the other things, as they were going, the final credits, they brought up that thing that was really interesting about his first wife, Reagan's first wife, was not a very good wife to him at the time when they were together. It sounds to me it was more of her fault than his fault that things didn't work out. But afterwards, she had this sort of spiritual conversion.
Yeah.
She becomes sort of a very religious person after she wins her Academy Award and all of that.
Yeah.
And then she votes for Reagan twice. She was a big Reagan supporter.
Right. She was very interesting in that she knew, just like her first husband, Ronald Reagan, I think she knew how to kind of play it a little bit both ways. She was actively criticizing him a lot, but she was quietly voting for him because she was a Democrat. So, I can't, it is. I got to kind of walk both sides of the thing there. She's a fascinating study herself. She really is. And, I think losing the child was what really just, she was so focused on her career, focused on his career. He was losing focus on his career because of his family and because political things, the specter of communism was actually just more interesting to him, which, believe me, I've spent my entire life in Hollywood. That happens at some point. It just stops being that interesting to you. But, but a story like Ronald Reagan's, boy, that got all of us re-energized, including Dennis Quaid. I want to say that about Dennis. Number one, he crushed it. He just crushed it. When we were shooting that film, honest to goodness, sometimes I thought I'm in the presence of Ronald Reagan right now. As a matter of fact, a funny thing that he said to me was, he said, my challenge is to not do a 2-hour Ronald Reagan impersonation. That's my challenge here. Because you may not know, I keep taking you down sidebars, and I apologize. One thing's about, John, I know you know exactly who Rich Little is. Do you know who Rich Little is, Thomas? You might not.
Rich Little.
He was probably the greatest impressionist that ever lived. I mean, there is nobody he could not impersonate to a T. He used to be on Johnny Carson doing it all the time. Well, when Dennis was a kid, he wanted to be Rich Little. And so that guy, Dennis, can impersonate anybody. And one of the real joys of shooting this movie is sometimes he would just, between shots or something, and he'd begin to have this imaginary conversation between Ronald Reagan and Bill Clinton. And I mean, it was funnier than anything could ever have been in the film. I mean, it was just magnificent. But you had a question in all that. I'm sorry, I just kind of went down the rabbit hole there. Oh, just Jane Wyman, just a fabulous actress. And she did. She sort of just had she kind of came back around into less Hollywood and more humanity. And she's a great lady. She's a great lady. Their marriages didn't work out. You know how it goes. It happens.
Yeah, but that was a nice little redemptive spin that just didn't give that information at the end of there. That was good.
Right. Yeah. Well, it was. I enjoyed that.
I really appreciated that you brought the greatest hits in the movie, because first of all, it's just nice to see them, again, because Reagan was such a cool guy, and but it was also nice to share with my kids, my oldest daughter. It was a nice introduction to her to who Reagan was and why people were, liked him so much. And I think I showed it. I bought the movie after we went to in the theater, and we showed it to my daughter, and she also learned a lot about the Cold War. Kind of got an introduction into that. And was that were you ever worried when you were writing it that this is just about putting too many of the hits in there, or you're just thinking like people will just eat this up?
Great question. The two fine lines that I have to walk are in a biopic like this is, number one, you don't want it to be just a greatest hits history lesson. Yeah. Secondly, I'll even say his name because it doesn't matter. Richard Dreyfuss was once considered one of the to be in the movie. He was, and I the great thing about my job is every now and then I get to hang out with people that were just my idols when I was a kid. And Richard is not exactly a Reagan conservative, and I'll just leave it at that. But a great guy and one of the greatest actors of our entire life. Anyway, he just blisters me over the phone for about a half an hour using the term hagiography. He goes, yeah, I'm not going to be part of some hagiography. Okay, here's the embarrassing thing. I'm a professional writer, and I was a history teacher. I was an academic for many years, and I'm listening to this conversation. I don't even know what a hagiography is. I was like, no, Richard, I would never write a hagiography. It's one of the funnier moments. Well, I saw, I actually have a dictionary on my desk. I'm talking to him on the phone and look at him. Hagiography, the biography of a saint. And sure enough, among those 82% of the critics that absolutely, one guy literally said, he goes, this is the worst movie ever made. And I said, wait a minute. Okay, you don't like it. I know where you are on the political spectrum, but man, there's way worse movies. I've written worse movies than this one. Now, come on. But he used the term hagiography again. I'm answering your question, believe it or not. I tend to go all over the place with it until I get there. But that's the thing. If you really want, it's the biography of a saint. That's the definition of the word, meaning he's so perfect. Everything he did was great. He never made a mistake. He was the great leader. No. If you watch the film, you can see his marriage fail. You can see him making mistakes. You can see him failing all day long. And that was the story of Reagan. Reagan's story was a guy that kept getting back up. That's the life story of Ronald Reagan, and that's the story that I stand by because I lived through his presidency. I paid close attention to this guy. He made lots of boo-boos as president. He was not absolutely perfect, but you know what? He kept coming back, and that's the story I wanted to tell. And I think that's what if I could say this without being just, giving myself away too much, I don't think we've had a president even close to that sense as far as his ability to connect with the people. I mean, the people, they understood he was frail. They understood. It's not frail as a person, but he's a man. He blew it a few times, just like I do, just like you do. And I think that was really the secret more than anything else. People connected to that. The Iran-Contra thing. He's at the end of that thing. He never comes right out and says, yes, I did that. But you know what, guys? I'm convinced he did. Because and the John Boyd, the Russian character, the guy asked him, he said, do you think he knew? And John Boyd said, he was a lifeguard. He was going to bring those people home no matter what he had to do. Mistake legally? Probably. Was it the right thing to do? Yeah. Yeah, it was.
I think most people, when he apologized, that they knew and they didn't.
They knew.
They
knew. Everybody got it. Everybody got it. Got it.
Yeah.
It's okay. Go back to work, please.
Now, we talked about this before. Did you like the SNL skit with Phil Hartman?
No. Nobody did Reagan like Hartman. He was the best. I absolutely loved it. Absolutely loved it.
Go ahead, John.
Okay, I was going to just pivot over a little bit to I mentioned Space Cowboys earlier. A very good film, which you wrote. I read some recent commentary from you where you described how Clint Eastwood, the director of that film, was gracious enough to have you on the set with him as it was being filmed, which I didn't realize this. It's apparently pretty rare for a writer to do that. So I've got to ask, what was it like working with Clint and being that this was relatively early in your film career? What all did you learn from him? I know that's another big question, but I'd love to hear the answer.
I think more than anything else, in my 20s, I knew I wanted to do this, but I come from fairly modest means, so I wasn't able to just explore myself as a screenwriter and an artist for 10 or 20 years till I finally sold something. I had to work like everybody else. So I was a school teacher. But along those lines, as I was going and coaching football, I was learning about leadership and things like that. And yeah, I understood the basics of making movies, but to watch one of the masters like that actually it wasn't so much his technique as a filmmaker and how he dealt with art actors and things like that. It was just simply the way he dealt with everybody. This guy and he's 95 years old, guys, and he's prepping a movie right now. I mean,
Wow.
he's like the Energizer Bunny. He just doesn't stop. He just keeps right on going. But I think the thing that Clint taught me more than anything else, and you're right, but writers are usually not only not really invited to the set, they're usually barred from it. But so you don't think I have an attitude about that? There's been a lot of writers who have literally stepped into scenes going, no, that's not how I wrote that. So they're not too excited about having you on set. So I knew, just keep your mouth shut, keep your eyes open. So I spent about a year just watching the master make a motion picture, and I was fortunate enough to have co-written it. So, it's like, so I had a real connection to watching everything the way he interpreted it. But the thing, John, in answering your question, finally, the thing I learned the most about him was his clarity, his calm, the way his demeanor with people. I never, when you go on movie sets, you're going to hear screaming and ranting and raving at some point from somebody. Never on a Clint Eastwood set. Never. All his movies come in on time or early, and on budget or under budget, because he's a pro. And as a pro, what that really means more than anything else is he just works with people really, really well. He's very Reagan like.
That sort of surprises me. I only know Clint Eastwood from his film for being in front of the screen, and
Mm-hmm.
the toughness that is Clint Eastwood. You just kind of figure that's probably part of who he is in real life as well. But it doesn't. It sounds like that's not the case.
He's not a big loud guy like me, but he's he's a very he's one of those guys that's just really comfortable in his own skin. He's very
Interesting.
relaxed. He doesn't bully anybody, doesn't yell at anybody, doesn't have to. But man, when he flips the switch as an actor, yeah, he's Dirty Harry all day long.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, I do have such, like I said, I've never met him. I do have a personal affection for the guy. I wrote a piece a few years ago called "The Gift of Clint Eastwood's Twilight Years," where I described how one of my favorite things that I used to do with my late father. He passed away earlier this year, almost 90. But
So sad.
I would take him to the theater to watch the latest Clint Eastwood film.
Mm,
Once he was still starring until just a few years later, but
yeah.
a few years ago. But my dad loved Clint. He loved his, the narrow-eyed ruggedness and the moral compass many of his characters had. Even if even if you had to peel back a few layers during this great, the movie, the story to find that compass. But
Yep.
for my dad, Clint really sort of epitomized what a man should be. And I just loved watching my father react to him on screen. There was almost a sense of pride to it, the way
Yeah.
my father would look at Clint. And
Yeah.
to me, that is such a special thing. And you don't really see that with a lot of, actors today.
No, and I think what you just said is really the parallel I see to him and Reagan. By the way, he liked Reagan. He liked Reagan a lot. Clint's a conservative, very much. Just conservative meaning not really active politically, but what I really consider real conservatism is just the principles that made our country great. Conserve them. It's like all that. It used to be back when I'm sorry, I'll make somebody mad when I say that was just being normal. It's
Yeah.
like,
That's a good
yeah,
point. That's a
I
good point.
believe in God. I love the family. I love my country. It's like, why is this rocket science? And so that's his approach. And I think Clint has the same thing. We have this innate connection to a guy like that. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, he won his Academy Award for Unforgiven, which was just a spectacular, probably the greatest Western I ever saw. But honestly, I mean, I thought Gran Torino is the old. I bet that is that the movie you took him to.
That's one of
He
them.
just,
One of them. We
yeah,
went all the way until basically till my father passed away. Some of those
just
later ones after Gran Torino were not as great, but my dad loved them nonetheless.
well, like we all want to consider our heroes and masculine men. One of the things is, we all consider them a lot less loquacious than I'm being right now. It's like they don't say a lot, And one of the this is what the only time I was on the receiving end of not much pleasure from my boss there. Always kind and gracious, but he had this rule about his dialogue on page. He didn't like that because Clint really didn't memorize his lines. He would just on set, he'd look at it and go, okay, I got it. And he was quite good at that. But his rule was to myself and Ken Kaufman, we wrote the movie together, was that's as big as dialogue ever gets on a page. Well, there's one scene in Space Cowboys where he's got to lay out all this exposition, and it's about like that. It's a big block of dialogue. And so he's directing himself and he's shooting this scene. And Clint usually knocks out every scene in 1 or 2 takes. This one probably takes him about 7 takes because there's so many words in it. But you had to have them in the plot. It won't make sense if you watch the movie. You got to know everything. When they called cut finally at the end of that scene, he turns and looks at me like the meanest spaghetti Western. I'm about to just blow your head off. He looks at me and goes, ugh. There was nowhere to go. I was looking for something. So I know what it feels like to be on the receiving end.
Oh, that's amazing. I guess that would be the one disadvantage of the writer being on the set.
Exactly. Exactly. I warn every writer about that. Maybe you don't want to go.
Well, I wanted to ask you about I-40 Studios. This is a
you.
relatively new creative development company, but it's
Yeah.
been in the works for a while.
Yeah.
As I mentioned at the top, you are the founder and president, and you have laid out a clear theme for the types of film and television stories that you were interested in. You call it heroic Americana, which I love. Can you talk about that? I know we've sort of hinted at this already, but can you talk about what heroic Americana is and what, oddly enough, makes it kind of unique in this day and age?
It's pretty sad that what you just said there, it's unique. Like,
Yeah,
it's unique.
it
So
doesn't feel like it should be, but
it really shouldn't. I mean, a lot of guys use different. We've been searching for a word that kind of describes everything that Reagan the movie kind of suggests. So I've been a writer for 35 years, and many things there. I've probably written 150 movies, something along that line. It sounds impressive, but it's 4 or 5 a year. That's about right. And many I've been hired to write, many I've sold. Some didn't sell for whatever reason, but I knew, like, this is pretty good middle of the country. When I say middle of the country, I don't mean geographic. I mean just the things we're talking about. I don't write Republican movies. I certainly don't write Democrat movies, but I write American movies. And everything, I'd say, if anything, the stories that I really seem to grasp onto the most are the heroic things. Heroes. And that's sort of, I think we're coming to the end of this era in Hollywood now. I think the superhero is kind of starting to finally fade away. I'm more interested in real people, and so, real people. And that can be a comedy. I've done very, very, very faith oriented movies, but like, yeah, I mean, it's like, yeah, but that's not it. And I also, when I hear something like Heartland, I think that sounds nice, but it also sounds kind of, I got just wimpy. I'm sorry, I'm gonna make somebody mad with that, but I just like Americana and I like heroes. So I mean, yeah. So I finally, after a lot of years, I had compiled about 20 pieces that I really, really love. I'm talking to you from a Show Dog studio here in Franklin, Tennessee. I partnered up with a guy by the name of John Attard. John's an Academy Award winner. He also said, let's make things like this together. So that's what we're doing. I'm about to kick off a couple of films this fall. And yeah, I mean, I'm more of a development company more than anything else, but going back to your Clint Eastwood story, I mean, I learned how to produce movies a long time ago. So that's really it. I'm not really on any great crusade other than to, make films like we really used to love a lot. Like the 80s and the 90s were probably the golden age, as far as I'm concerned, of the American movie. They're very, very similar stuff. So yeah, I'm open for business. I've started making films here.
excellent. Well, you were kind enough to give Thomas and I secret access to some of the projects in the summary. So several, like you said, they're ready to go. Some great sounding stuff in there, and we wish you
Thank
luck
you.
for sure.
Thank you very much.
Did you want to add anything, Thomas?
Oh no, I I don't think so. No.
Oh, okay, that's all right. I wanted to give you. We were going to wrap up, but I wanted to give you a spot there to see if you had anything else. Well, Howie, I wanted to thank you so much for coming on the Reagan Caucus podcast. This was a real pleasure. You're a great person to talk to. A lot of fun.
Thank
I know
you.
listeners are
Thank
going to
you.
enjoy this episode and hearing
Yay.
about these stories and about Reagan. And we'd love
Yeah.
to check back with you down the road if that's okay.
Please do. I'm probably going to be releasing my first one this time next year. So I'll be begging you to come on your podcast, John. Begging you.
Oh, excellent,
What's
excellent. Well,
what's it called?
Mr. 64. And that's all I can say.
oh,
It's I'll just pitch you the movie. I don't care. It's one of the sweetest things. I love it. I am not really a golfer, but I love golf, and it's the story. It's a comeback kid kind of thing. It's a golf story about a guy who's got to pick up his clubs again after 20 years, really to save the life of a special needs boy that he's fallen in love with his mother. And so it's a love story. It's a special needs kind of, the whole thing with special needs kids when they age out of the system, how difficult that is. And the guy has only got one way to help this family out, is to pick up his golf clubs, and he's going to enter the U.S. Open. And you can take it from there.
Very cool.
No, that's fantastic. Well, like I said, thanks, Howie, and I want to thank everybody else who's watching or listening today for tuning in. Make sure, if you are watching this episode on YouTube, to like the video and subscribe to our channel. If you're listening to us on Spotify, Apple Podcast, or some other audio platform, please like and subscribe as well. We're going to keep having great guests on like Howie, and we're going to see you all next time on the Reagan Caucus Podcast. Thanks, everyone.